Lots to talk about. The Liberal leadership contenders enjoy an amicable second debate. More ER closures in BC Interior. Tories say Mark Carney lied about his involvement with Brookfield's move to the US, and British Petroleum, or BP, pulls back on renewables and goes all in on fossil fuels. And polls suggest Liberals are back in front ahead of this federal election. I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. With me, Ian Burns, managing editor in Ottawa. Weather looking pretty good here in Kelowna. Traffic flowing well. Ian, Ottawa, how are we doing out there?
It's a beautiful sunny day, and it's actually fairly mild as well. But the next 3 days are going to be very snowy, so we're going back to the madness.
Back to the madness. There you go. It's Pink Shirt Day, and I am wearing a very light pink shirt. It probably looks a little white. You got that graphic to put up there, Rommel? There you go. Be Kind Day, Pink Shirt Day. Like I said, I had my red shirt on, which tends to look pink, and and then now I have a light pink shirt on that looks white. But there you go. It's pink. If you're here, it's definitely pink.
You just can't win, can you?
Can't win, yeah. So if you're trying to go pink, then you're having a tough time. But yeah, um, there you go. High school counselor banned for life in BC after child pornography conviction.
Yeah, I mean that's a very bad job to have to be doing that kind of thing as well, isn't it? Because the
There's a lot of
counselors have
trust.
pretty sort of intimate relationships with the kids, don't they? So it's pretty
Yeah,
terrifying that.
that's a pretty bad trust to be broken. That's for sure. Um, so he's been his teaching license has been taken away permanently. He only got a year in jail though, right?
Yeah, and then, like a kind of lots of rules applied after, like he had to submit his DNA and things like that. They're pretty strict with the sort of things you have to do afterwards. And then I think he's got like 20 years or at least on the sex offenders register or whatever it is. But I mean, theoretically, this guy could still go and move somewhere else, couldn't he? Like China or the Middle East. I mean, sometimes that happens, doesn't it? Like disgraced professionals in Western countries sometimes go to more like forgiving jurisdictions, let's say. But who knows? I mean, either way, it's every parent's nightmare, probably, isn't it? To know that there was a teacher or a person in a position of responsibility at a school who was doing, the worst of the worst, really. Abuse of children was interested in at least the abuse of children. Had that material in his possession.
Are we not able to get the live up on TikTok, Rommel? I don't see it, but anyway. Yeah, so he was a teacher a counselor in the West Vancouver District 45, and he was fired and permanently has taken his teaching license away. The ER closures continue in the BC Interior. Again, Steve McNall, one of our reporters, did a story with the mayor of Merritt. And so far this year, there's been 3 temporary closures already in the emergency room and in Nicola Valley Hospital in Merritt. And last year, over the same period, January, February, there was none. They usually had most of their closures in the summertime when the doctors and the nurses are taking their holidays. But this time it's starting early.
Yeah, and that's what he said. What he said there, I'd love to tell everyone that everything's sailing along, but it isn't. I mean, that is very gloomy kind of language that you don't often hear from politicians of any kind, really. So obviously, that's an indication of just how serious it is. And just the fact that this continues, there have been promises now for years that this would be fixed, but I mean, at this point, you have to ask, is it actually ever going to be fixed? 'Cause it doesn't really look like it, does it?
23 closures last year, and some of those closures are 12 to 24 hours. And most of those came in the second half of the year. So that's showing that the closures kind of accelerated, and there was none in January, February last year, and here we go with more closures. And they'd lost 2 of their doctors due to the COVID vaccine. And you can go back and read those articles. We did a lot of coverage on this. That the mayor very outspoken on his frustration with his community, because like they have to drive to Kamloops then or Kelowna to, and when you're talking snow-covered roads, that's pretty frustrating for people that should expect, in a city the size of Merritt,
I
emergency.
mean, especially when it's an emergency as well. And that was what, because this is Dan Albas. He's the MP for Merritt, I believe, isn't he? And
Yeah.
he came and chat and had a chat with you, and he was saying you can't realistically do that when you've broken your leg very badly or something like that. And he was kind of saying that there's a very realistic possibility that you will lose a limb. So if you just happen to be in Merritt versus Vancouver, you will potentially lose your fingers or your arm or your leg or something like that, whereas somebody in Vancouver wouldn't. I mean, that is such you hear so much about disparities, don't we, and how there are like different tiers of service provided. But look at that. I mean, that's tragic, isn't it? In British Columbia, one of the richest parts of Canada, Canada being one of the richest countries in the world, and yet there are some people who get to keep their limbs and some who don't, based on, which hospital they live near. It's absolutely tragic.
Yeah, and again, like Merritt is a fair-sized city, and it's like an hour and a half really to from Kelowna. But in the wintertime, those roads can be treacherous, depending on snowfalls, and sometimes closed. And the same thing, to Kamloops is again over a mountain pass as well on the Coquihalla, right? So it's not like it the roads play a lot of havoc in that for sure, and could make it so that you can't even get through.
Well, yeah, we saw when there was the flooding and the province was cut in half. You couldn't get anywhere, could you? You could only go east from places like Mary.
They've had a long time to fix this, and they need to do something about this. They need to really just move some doctors from the Lower Mainland so that this doesn't continue. It's the interior that's suffering, and the north. And this didn't just say the interior, but the BC's outside the Lower Mainland is where we're seeing most of the pain and pressure here.
But yeah, I mean, it is an intractable problem, isn't it? It's like it's one of those. It's to do with the demographics, isn't it? It's to do with like the lack of young people and the preponderance of old people in certain parts of the province. But I don't know. I mean, they do try and offer them more money. They do try to offer them like little boosts and special like signing on fees and things. But obviously, it's not enough, is it? It's not. It isn't doing the trick. So I don't know what the answer is really. Probably it would be to try and, like you said, try and like establish some kind of rota where they do actually have to just go out. That it's a necessary part of their contract to go out to the interior at some point. But then maybe they're reluctant to do that because there's such a competition for doctors that maybe a doctor would happily practice in Vancouver, but not under those terms. Therefore, you kind of have to just sacrifice the interior, and I think maybe that's what's happening.
There was that talk and rumor out there, or there was I guess, unsubstantiated uh, source out there saying that unverified source, and that here's a rebuttal for this thing on the Canada being removed from the Five Eyes. So this is the person that was named as the leak, and he's responding.
Because I got to be in there. But this nonsense from the Financial Times is a product of a culture in the media where they report stories and never name their sources. And my view is that we should never have to comment on any story where it's based on unnamed sources. Have you ever noticed that? Okay, that was just crazy stuff. We would never, ever jeopardize our national security, ever, with allies like Canada, ever. So please stop doing that. And I have proposed, and I hope somebody's hearing me, that we just don't pay any attention to any questions that are based on anonymous sources. That's all I got to say. We'll talk maybe later today. We got a
That's
nice
good, Noble. There you go. And that's what you and I were saying yesterday. It seems odd that they would jeopardize their national security to stick a stick in Canada's eye.
Well, I would have two things to say to that. One, agreeing with this fella, and one, strongly disagreeing with him. One is where he says, "Why would we jeopardize our relationship with Canada, security relationship?" You've already done that. Your
Mhm.
president has done that. And if you're too much of a spineless slave to acknowledge that, then maybe we shouldn't listen to you. as well as not listen to the Financial Times. That's point number one. And point number two is, yeah, the Financial Times, CNN, a lot of these big sort of left liberal leaning outlets have for a very long time now been doing this anonymous sources, or anonymous source within the intelligence community, and pretending that that's adequate to write a story. It isn't. It's not adequate. The so-called intelligence community has its own motivations, and they've been putting lies into the press for a century now. So why, he's right, I think. Why should you listen to the sort of garbage that these outlets put out there? And, the outlets are either being gullible or they're going along with it, but they must know that the CIA, FBI, whatever, MI5, they have their own objectives and they have absolutely no qualms whatsoever about lying to the press. They've done it many, many times. There's lots of declassified documents out there that show you that they've done that many times. So, yeah, he's right. If it's ever if it's ever about intelligence and it comes out in an anonymous source, I think you're pretty much safe to ignore it. Yeah, I agree with him on that.
Yeah, so speaking of the intelligence community, Tulsi Gabbard, who heads up the intelligence community in the United States now, fired 100 NSA agents, supposedly using NSA chat lines to discuss sex and stuff like that. So 100 of them been fired.
Yeah, I mean, God, I do find it funny that they get called a community, like as if they all sort of go to church together, go bowling together or something like that. It's very weird. It's a weird term to use. But yeah, I mean, look, they've been implicated in all sorts, going back decades and decades. They're pretty sort of dishonest, disreputable people, I'm sorry to say. Spies in general. Who'd have thought spies would be dishonest? But they are. And I would just say take absolutely everything that they say and do with a pinch of salt, because your freedom as an individual citizen might depend on that sort of skepticism towards those people.
Eleanor Sturko, and we talked about it with Renee Merrifield the other day, doing a lot of work in the fentanyl crisis world. We got a clip here to play from Eleanor Sturko in the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Free shipping. 10% off your first order is supposed to be the promotion for buying chocolate from a local store, not for buying ultra-premium cocaine. Online stores like Delix are following the Premier's example of normalizing drugs and pushing safe supply. They'll ship cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin direct to your door. They're going to ship it via Canada Express Post, disguised as a box of chocolates. All you need is a credit card, no questions asked, no proof of age. Years of NDP drug legalization activism running roughshod through this province has emboldened criminals and has increased the demand for illicit drugs. When will the Premier show some real concern for the health and safety of British Columbians and intervene?
Hey, Ronald. There you go, Eleanor Sturko. Definitely doing a lot of work in that area.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a product of many, many years of cultural attitudes towards drugs, I would say. There's been, for decades now in Western countries, and I think Canada's probably been number one in the in the rankings. There's been this attitude towards drugs that, they're not really that much of a problem, and it's crazy to put people in prison because of drugs and so on, and that, it's your choice. I think the cultural sort of libertarianism, let's say, towards drugs is so profound, it's so strong, and that it's led ultimately to this. And I think it's like a big cultural battle about that.
You might want to hold your hands up or your tinfoil a little bit there, because to fix your antenna there, because it sounds like you're underwater a little bit. I don't know if you can move your device around or something. Shake it.
Is that any better?
We'll see. Ontario mortgage delinquencies rates jumped 50% amid growing signs of high rate renewal shock. And we're starting to see a lot of those renewals come in, and it's really causing a lot of crisis for a lot of people. Are you there, Ian? Oh, he's going to dial back in. There he is. He's back in. So yeah, so a lot of mortgages coming up. Are you there? Ian? I'm not sure. Is he there? Oh, okay. He's working on it, I guess. So Toronto now has the third highest non-mortgage delinquency rate in Canada, trailing on Fort McMurray and Edmonton. Consumer debt hits $2.56 trillion, fueled by rising car loan defaults. So a lot of trouble in the mortgage world as renewals start to happen at these higher rates. Ian, are you there yet?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's much better. There you go. You're back.
I'm not sure what that was. I think probably I made the unwise decision to criticize the CIA and intelligence people, and just like that,
Just
they're
like
on
that.
me.
They turned you
And
down.
I'm only half joking, but anyway, you talk about delinquencies. Yeah, it's look, we'll talk about the Liberal debate soon, but they keep talking about how Canada's macro position is great. Like, and Karina Gould was particularly keen on saying that we're doing really well. Debt to GDP is the lowest in the G7. We've all heard it before, but
Yep.
look at consumer debt in Canada. It's pretty much the worst on the planet.
Yep.
It is absolutely bonkers, and it's mostly down to housing. People are so insanely over leveraged in this country. It's not a surprise that you have these kind of delinquencies because the average Canadian is a debt slave. It's absolutely brutal. It's a horrible situation that the average Canadian is in. And we don't really hear very much about that, do we? That wasn't mentioned in the Liberal debate, and either of them, the French or the English one. They just look at the macro and they say, oh yeah, in terms of public sector debt or, like government debt, we're actually doing okay. I don't think that really matters very much when your population is like way over 100% GDP indebted. It's terrible.
Yeah, so that Liberal leadership debate went last night. You watched it, and maybe you want to give us kind of a recap of what you thought of that debate.
Well, I thought Mark Carney was like very, very reluctant to be aggressive in any way because obviously anybody with any knowledge of how political campaigns work, they know that he's the front runner and he's acting like the front runner. So he's trying to say nothing, do nothing. It was lots of friendly sort of like, thank you, Karina. Great point, Karina. Like that sort of thing. Just being he's almost like being the leader already, bringing in the
Yeah.
voices of the subordinates. Chrystia Freeland tried to present herself as the tried and tested victor who's gone up to Donald Trump, beaten him, and can do it again, kind of thing. So it was a lot about her because she was obviously the principal negotiator for Canada when the new NAFTA was worked out. Though, as a side note, she was considered to have actually
You can
been
change
quite a
that slide
disaster
level.
in that. But that's besides the point. Karina Gould was the challenger, and she kept challenging all the rest of them from the left.
Rommel.
A lot of people were saying that she actually sounded a lot more like an NDP MP rather than a Liberal, and I would agree with that. She was talking about UBI, Universal Basic Income. She was talking about she was also protecting the memory of Justin Trudeau, the soon to be departed Justin Trudeau. As she was saying, he did a lot of good things and he really energized the party in 2015 and defended the carbon tax again. And then you had the one interesting person, I would say, at least in terms of, if you follow the Liberals around a lot, he was the most interesting one to hear from, and that was Frank Baylis, who was very pro-business, and he kept talking about pipelines, and he kept saying, I have experience of business, unlike the rest of these people. A bit of a jibe, I suppose. And his whole shtick was, we need to fix the economy, and I'm the one to do it because I understand how business works, basically. And he was kind of sidelined, to be honest. He wasn't really getting a lot of acknowledgement from the from his colleagues, but that was basically it. A lot of it was Donald Trump, as you might expect, and a lot of it was the economy and how to fix it.
Yeah, let's be frank. Frank doesn't have much of a chance.
No.
He may seem like the more reasonable one. Like Frank is like when you look at the polls, Frank is not even kind of in the running, and even Chrystia Freeland is a way distant second to Mark Carney. But Carney did attack Justin Trudeau's tenure and saying that the economy has been weak for a while. We've got a clip here to play from that debate last night here from Mark Carney.
I want to be clear, and Canadians feel this. I want to be clear about the, quote, strength of our economy. Our economy over the last 5 years has been driven by a big increase in the labor force, which was largely because of a surge in immigration that is now trying to be controlled, and by government spending that grew over 9% year after year after year, twice the rate of growth of our economy. Okay, so our economy was weak before we got to the point of these threats from President Trump. That's why we need big changes. That's the reason I'm here. That's why we need big changes to how we're managing this economy. I want to make one last point, which goes to workers. My plan, it's a time to build across this economy. We can go into more detail. It is going to be a great time going forward to be a worker in Canada. It is going to be a great time to be in the trades in Canada because we are going to build this country across this country.
Yeah, so he came out and acknowledged that our economy was, in big trouble far before Trump became, with his tariffs and that. At least there was some honest acknowledgement of that. And then, Andrew Scheer had a rebuttal there on X there saying that you can't make this stuff up. Carney condemns the economic wreckage of the last 5 years, conveniently leaving out that he was Trudeau's hand-picked economic advisor the entire time.
Yeah, although I would say Carney's response to that would be, yes, I was an advisor. I wasn't the decision maker. So he's kind of saying, I mean, his argument will probably be something like, I did not advise Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland to do what they did. I can only imagine that's what he's going to say anyway.
So
when he said that about the economy already being weak, he actually took quite a lot of heat from both Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gould, who said, passive aggressively, I should say, they didn't actually directly have a go at him, but in a passive way, they said, we shouldn't talk Canada down. We shouldn't speak the same way that Pierre Poilievre speaks and so on. And then that's when they start talking about the macro stuff. Both of them, both Gould and Freeland were saying, in so many words, the economy is great, really, but people don't realize that, which is, that's the same sort of language that sunk the party in the first place, but they're hanging on to it.
It's that you can't talk bad about, criticize the Bank of Canada. You can't criticize this. That's been their thing. They hide behind, and those two have learned that very well, that you're not allowed to criticize. That's been their thing, because obviously they should be criticized, and they don't like criticism, and so that's how they put it out there, that criticizing makes it worse. How about honesty? That might be a better thing to do, right? And here's actually some honesty from Mark Carney and saying it. But I would also add, though, if you've been the economic advisor for a number of years and they're not following your advice, then why are you still doing the job? Like, you're taking money for it, and you're being the advisor, and they don't listen to you. That doesn't seem to, like, you would leave then, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and the same, obviously, the exact same line should be put to Chrystia Freeland. But I mean, the host of the debate was completely just soft and feeble. She wasn't trying to press them on anything. She was one of the chums. She was being very, she might as well have left the pub with them earlier on to have a good laugh on TV. There was no scrutiny whatsoever over the Liberals.
A lot of the commentary is, you look at it from a different way, that this was the most civilized debate ever, ever in politics. Or it wasn't really a debate, right? It was basically you're there and kind of like acting out a thing, because we already know what the plan is, and everybody seems to know what the plan is, and you're just moving it along and going through the motions for this excuse to prorogue government. There's a couple of different ways.
Well, yeah, and there's something that you've mentioned that wasn't brought up. That wasn't even on one occasion. That wasn't brought up. The sort of crisis of Canada being rudderless right now.
I mean, did they ask the question, will you call an election?
I think they might have asked that in the French one when I cast my mind back, but I don't think they did on this English one.
Yeah,
But
because
I
I mean
mean,
that's the question
the
most
thing is, they
Canadians
didn't
have.
call them out. They didn't call them out on the most basic things. Like I was just saying there about Freeland was one of the two liberals there on the stage that said, the economy's actually quite good. We've heard her say that loads of times, and obviously she is going to say that because she was in charge of the economy for the last however many years, several years. But when she said that, that kind of just floated on by. The moderator didn't have anything to say. Nobody challenged her on it really. And then within about 5 minutes, it might even have been less than that, she said because it went on to housing, she said the young people in Canada have been denied the same life that their parents had in terms of material possessions and income and that kind of thing, quality of life. And so she's saying we need to fix that. And I'm just thinking, you just said the economy's doing well. Well, like the Canadian economy is doing, the macro indicators are brilliant actually, according to you. And you're in charge for that, and you should be, you're saying the Liberals should actually be quite pleased about their handling of the economy. If that's true, why are young people impoverished? Why don't they have the same lives as their parents had? What's the expert? How are those two things both true? It just made no sense to me
Well,
at all.
asking questions that make common sense would force them to kind of like rifle through their talking points and trying to find one that kind of matches up with what you're saying because they're not speaking authentically. Because if you don't acknowledge Canada's current economic situation, like Carney did, credit there, then you're definitely oblivious to what's going on, and I don't think you're a serious politician.
Well, I mean, what made me wonder about the seriousness of the debate, obviously it wasn't a debate, the seriousness of the roundtable friendly discussion that they had was when they started to talk about defense. And it was fantastical thinking. I mean, they were like in a Disney movie of nonsense, basically. There was not even an ounce of reality in that room while they talked about defense, all delusional. But then Frank Bayless, being the big business guy, and trying to like boost his business credentials, said it's no good just committing to a certain percentage of GDP spend on defense if what we spend it on is a waste. We can't just waste the money. We can't just throw it at things and then say, look, we spent the money, which is actually a commonly heard conservative
That's
talking point. They say you can't just throw money at it. And then when he said that, Karina Gould interjected and said, spending money on our military is never wasted, or something along those lines. And I just thought,
talking point.
that is the cherry on top, really. It's
Yeah.
impossible to waste that money because it's going on the military. So if you spend $500,000 on a golf buggy for the military, then that's not wasted because that's the military. That's money being spent on the military. It's just like
Yeah.
completely unserious, deluded thinking. And I feel like I just think that's what happens when you don't have scrutiny. That's what happens when you don't have an actual debate, when it's just a lot of friends having a little chin wag together.
Yeah.
Things like that aren't scrutinized and you can just get away with it, which is why fundamentally, it wasn't a debate. And that's why it's been criticized along those lines.
Yeah, so it goes back to a basic thing on goals or missions. And if the mission is just to spend money, you can spend money like crazy. And I'll give just even a personal example from like, even like for yourself in fitness. If your goal is just to go to buy a gym pass, so that you think you're going to get fit, that doesn't do anything. You've just wasted money on a fitness pass unless you actually go and do it right. So yeah, so just spending money makes no sense. But the statistics don't lie though either. Our military right now is under 55,000. Our supposed full complement is 77,000. And then if you put that in context with what Ukraine has for a military is 1 million soldiers deployed. I mean, obviously they're at war. But for the size of our nation and our huge unprotected borders in the north there, 55,000 seems to be very, very, very low and also very underpaid.
It's not even just that what you say about our own borders, because both Melanie Joly and um, Justin Trudeau have said in the last few days that sending Canadian soldiers to Ukraine is on the table.
Yeah.
Or, they didn't say, they actually said nothing is off the table, which
Yeah.
is the same thing. It's just,
Yeah.
but anyway, they've implied that Canadian soldiers can be sent off to Ukraine. I mean, again, how can that be serious when there's barely any soldiers in the first place in the military? I mean, it's obviously been neglected. And the only thing that I could say to kind of lessen the misery of all this is to say that the exact same thing is true across the Western world, particularly in Europe, where they've vandalized and neglected their militaries for decades and just been absolutely imbecilic. They've been morons about it. And this is now the reckoning. Donald Trump is kind of he is the hammer that's delivering the blow. But this has been in the making now for decades. The European countries and Canada taking the military for granted, and it just feels like something's kind of flipped, and they can't get away with it anymore.
Yeah. So people have to realize, and I think most people do, that one thing that the United States has done very well is their military is the top, and that's why, like you just said, Donald Trump has the hammer, and it's working in Europe too. They're respecting the hammer and what he says, and he wields it, and he's definitely a boisterous character that doesn't know when to be diplomatic. But there is no doubt that military is what people fear in the world. It is the hammer, and ours has been neglected because we rest under that umbrella. And look what that's gotten us, right? We rest under their umbrella, and we neglect our military. We neglect our opportunities to find outside sources for our resources. And here we are at the mercy of the Americans.
Yeah, and it isn't just Trump, we should add. I mean, Obama was really at the time during his presidency, he was considered to have been the most candid and even insulting when on that subject when he called certain European countries freeloaders, if you remember that. That was quite an infamous sort of speech that he gave. So, I mean, Obama's been, it never stops fascinating me how similar in so many ways the Obama presidency and the Trump presidency have been. Very similar themes. And obviously Biden also, and I'm racking my brains here, but I think also George W. Bush was also a complainer in this area. So it's kind of it's an old complaint now.
I think the difference
But I
between
feel like some of it.
the difference
Sorry,
between
go ahead.
Obama the difference between Obama and Trump is, Obama had a more charismatic delivery, whereas Trump is very unvarnished and direct.
Yeah, and Trump likes to play the invisible accordion as well while he does the speeches. That's something else unique to him. But I think it's a little bit of double talk as well from the Americans, because obviously they established NATO, they established military dominance around the world in their own interests. They didn't do it out of the kindness of their hearts. That's a stupid thing to say, or I don't know anybody that believes that. It's because it's obviously Americans don't do anything for free. That's kind of the American psyche, isn't it? That's why Donald Trump's the president, because he promised to go closer to that sort of American attribute. They did this because they wanted global dominance, and it's benefited them for a very long time. And they also, as we've discussed many times, they were desperate not to have a challenger in Eurasia. This goes back, a century at least.
Right.
They didn't want Europe and Russia to join together and create a potential rival to United States dominance. This is what it's all about. So for the Americans, all of a sudden now, particularly with Trump, to say or to hint that they're just going to pull out of NATO basically and not come to the rescue of the Europeans, that's a little bit rich from them. But it is also simultaneously very, very cheeky and irresponsible from the Europeans and the Canadians to think that in this world, with China and Iran and Russia, to think that they can just not spend any money on their military and just have a joke of a military with a few 40 or 50,000 soldiers. I mean, that's irresponsible in the extreme, isn't it?
Yep. And then, the message from the liberals and the leadership there, their big message, buy Canadian, buy Canadian, buy Canadian. And then this is being pushed out there quite a bit right now. This is Michael Barrett saying that Carney lied. He was the chair of Brookfield's board when they unanimously voted to move their headquarters out of Canada to New York City, Trump's hometown. And then here's the letter he wrote to shareholders. He brought a receipt there, so you can go online and you can find that and you can read that. So I mean, that is tough to swallow when he talks about all this, and yet he moved his company just recently too. And when he obviously was contemplating running for this, because he didn't decide overnight to run for the Liberal leadership.
Yeah, and I mean, this is like a real big thing, isn't it? This isn't just some random company. This is like $1 trillion asset
Yeah.
fund. It's like
And
one of those, it's one of the companies that Canada has that is like as big as anything else in the whole world, isn't it? It's like one of Canada's absolute winners, one of its like golden eggs.
And here's the thing, it's raising money in the United States too. It's trying to raise $40 billion and to go and purchase a bunch of green assets, and it's, purchased a bunch, but also, it does sell a lot of the traditional energy products as well. But, it's definitely also, I think it just made a $1.7 billion investment in the UK in green assets.
Yeah. And things aren't going very well in the UK, I would say, on the energy side, if anybody wants to have a read about that.
We do have a clip from Chrystia Freeland from last night as well.
I am so glad to have childcare mentioned. As finance minister, one of the things I was so grateful to be able to do was to introduce in my first budget a national system of early learning and childcare. And it was wonderful to work first with Ahmed Hussein, get that first crucial deal with BC and a bunch more. And then Ahmed handed the baton to Karina, and we worked together. This is generational. It's transformational for Canada. My affordability plan includes 100,000 more childcare places. It includes a middle-class tax cut. It includes a cut on credit card fees. It includes a cut on taxes for first-time home buyers. And the critical thing for us to all remember is the real threat to Canadian families, the real threat to people working really hard and struggling to get by is not anyone on this stage. It is Pierre Poilievre. He will cut, cut, cut. He will bring in a cruel austerity that will hurt all the people in Canada who need the help the most. And that's why I'm proud to be a Liberal, and that's why I'm running to be the next leader of our party.
So there you go, the Liberal machine talking, putting fear as one of their best tools, and they use it all the time. And they put words into the mouth of, Pierre Poilievre, cut, cut, cut. And yeah.
I just thought that was a self-contradicting sentence or paragraph or whatever you want to say that she read out there, because what she basically said is everybody's life in Canada kind of sucks. The economy sucks, even though we've been in charge for the last 10 years. However, the real threat is the guy that isn't in power and hasn't been in power for 10 years. It's
makes no sense,
me?
Right? Makes no sense at all. If she was an American politician, doing this stuff for the last 10 years, she would be on every late night show every night, and they would just play clips of her and then just leave it there.
Yep.
Yeah, but we don't have that kind of diverse kind of media in Canada. We have a lot of our national voices are basically, you can go look at them and they're going to have the same headline from whether you're looking at Global, CTV, or CBC. It's like they go to a headline generator and they pull the same headlines. They don't necessarily ever contradict each other, do they?
Yeah, well, National Post is a bit different, but then is sometimes also accused of being extreme and things, which I find nuts. It's it's a pretty sort of moderate conservative outlet, isn't it? But I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot of deference to the Liberal Party as well. The Liberal Party are it's cherished. It's easy to forget that now that they've been in the dumps for quite a while. But the Liberal Party is a really cherished institution for a lot of people in Canada, and I feel like that goes all the way up to the top in the media as well. And there's a lot of love for the idea of the Liberal Party and what it represents in Canada. And I think that that comes out. We see that with the deference that they're given. Whereas the Conservatives are often looked upon as being like upstarts, I find, and being like rabble rousers, and they're seen as outsiders a lot of the time. It's quite an interesting dynamic, I think.
Speaking of outsiders, ousted, fired, actually, live on TV, Ruby Dalla, which is, Renee and I talked about it, like how humiliating is that? She was actually fired from the party live on TV by CBC. And, well, they didn't fire her, but they let her know that she was fired live on TV. She did a live stream last night, too, with a TikTok influencer they're bragging that they got more views on that than the debate got for the Liberal leadership.
That's not hard though, is it? I mean, if you wanna go and find a cat somewhere and record a cat yawning or something like that, almost certainly that will get more views than the Liberal debate.
One of
The
the
internet is a funny place, isn't it? I mean,
One of the things that is definitely that I see is good for media is in the United States right now. They're recognizing other streamers and that they're bringing in a lot of people into the White House briefing room and then saying that that it isn't just frozen out to a certain media, that they're bringing in these people that have millions of followers and that and some of them have been doing news, but they just weren't part of the big networks, and then now they're getting access to the president. And this, love him or hate him, and a lot of people or strongly feel either way on him, is he's given access to the reporters like 2-3 times a day. How many times did Joe Biden give access to reporters?
yeah, well, I mean, God bless him. I don't think he was up to it, was he? Poor old fella. But there was certainly like in terms of his handlers, yeah, they didn't want that. They didn't want media
Well,
attention. And
how
the
many?
same was true with Kamala Harris. She didn't do
Uh,
half the media that Trump did in the election campaign.
well, I,
But
I mean,
no, it
he's
is good because the press they can sort of represent almost like a pressure group at times where they're just it's so hive-minded in a lot of the like Associated Press, New York Times, Washington Post, and so on. They're all so similar, and the same was true in England when I worked in the press in England. Just basically everybody had roughly the same sort of background in life and had very similar opinions. And that is, in the end, that comes out very badly for democracy. Whereas at least with Trump, he is bringing in a lot of these kind of like peripheral, in some cases, like weirdo news organizations, but at least they're coming in and they're like, they have a different perspective. And that's really important because then it's not just going to be the same old boring questions that don't really go to the heart of the question, but that's what that small group of people in the press want to know about for their own personal reasons sometimes.
and Polyev says he's going to do the same thing, open up the press gallery, because it's the same thing in Canada here. There's only the select few that are allowed into this press gallery, the parliamentary gallery, and it's really not fair for a lot of people that dedicate their lives to this.
Indeed, but it does achieve the objective, which is to make sure that it's the narrowest possible window of opinions are allowed into the press gallery. So then the politicians are asked the same boring questions that represent the same boring opinions of a tiny minority of people in Canadian society. And that's one of the reasons that nobody trusts the media. One
And
of
then
many reasons.
some of the comments here is that brought up that Mark Carney's company is being sued by a mayor in Lima, the mayor of Lima in Brazil there, over the actions of Brookfield Asset Management, and that story is out there. That lawsuit's been going on for a number of years now, that legal battle.
Is that not Peru, Lima?
Sorry, Peru, Lima, Peru. That's correct. That's correct. They should have our fact checker here. I should turn on our Q thing here.
I'm just trying to fill in.
There you go. And then the poll, you sent this in yesterday. They sent it to you. Leger sent a poll showing that now that with Mark Carney, I mean that's what they're with Mark Carney at the helm. They're saying that it's neck and neck horse race now between the Conservatives and the Liberals.
Yeah, there was actually another one released. I think it was yesterday as well. That was who was that again? Ipsos. Ipsos released one, and that also had the Liberals ahead. So, I mean, look, we have to say it every single time just to get it out there. But I mean, polls are very flawed, and you shouldn't necessarily take them as the truth. But they do have an effect. They have a real material effect on how people feel and act, and
Yeah.
how they spend their money, for example, like donors. So it is very interesting, and it will be very consequential that this has happened. And I'm sure that a lot of Conservative Party members and bigwigs are pulling their hair out now at the prospect that they've blown a 20-point lead.
Yeah. So then, if you look at the NDP, a lot of that Liberal gain is at the NDP expense. But then Jagmeet put that ad out there where he was Rocky, and looks like he's got a little bit of a kick up from his Rocky ad there.
People like a fighter.
Apparently. And then we looked at the other poll, the money poll, and this is Polymarkets, which has been fairly good, Polymarkets. And it does show that the Liberals are gaining ground for sure, and that the Conservatives are losing ground. But the gap is still not, as tight as what the Leger poll shows. It shows Poilievre there at 63% now, and Carney at 37%. So you can actually go on there and you can make a bet, and you get. And you can buy, like a Poilievre win for 64 cents. And then, like Carney still the long shot. And Chrystia Freeland, it's a super long shot, right? And don't forget, voting starts today for the Liberal leadership race. So it's proven to be a little more difficult than what they first were doing in that voting, where basically anybody with a pulse could vote. And then all of a sudden, not even a pulse probably, a lot of bots. Now they're asking for a lot of ID. I don't know how thorough that will be. We'll see, I guess. And how many they actually end up getting for the vote, because they said they had 400,000 registered. How many of those are going to be validated would be the better question, right?
Yeah, and how long is that going to take? Because, I imagine the Liberal Party doesn't have like a huge amount of staff to go through all this. So it'll be interesting.
Well, they've got all of Ruby Dalla's money to spend.
They can spend it on hiring a lawyer to fend off her legal challenge if she goes ahead with one.
I imagine she will. I don't think she's given up. I think that the public firing was humiliating, and I think that in itself is probably. There may be a lawsuit in Ruby Dalla's future, because I think that in itself was for Justin Trudeau's Liberals to say that he's a feminist first, to publicly fire somebody on air seemed just one step too far again.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine it's a very I can't imagine there's anybody that celebrated that really, because it was very uncomfortable to watch.
I couldn't believe it. Like it's like it is a company. If you fire somebody and let the staff know that the person is fired first. I mean, I was at a company once where they accidentally did it. They sent the firing letter to the person, like to get approval. They sent, hey, we're going to send this to this guy, and he's going to get this letter. But they actually sent it to him by accident.
Oh dear.
And so there was when they ended up giving him 6 months severance, retraining, a whole bunch of things to try and apologize for it, because it was humiliating in itself, right? So, and this firing somebody on live TV takes humiliation to another level, and I think even CBC should be held accountable for it.
Yeah, well, it's a tricky one, that, isn't it? If you think about it yourself, if you're interviewing someone and then the email drops in your inbox saying that she's been disqualified. I mean, hard to just ignore that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure what the right thing to have done there would have been for the CBC. I think the real problem is that they didn't do their very best to try and tell her way in advance, like hours and hours in advance of sending it to the media.
Getting acknowledgement from her saying, hey, just to let you know this is happening, before they even leak it or tell anybody else. Like, you should tell her first. But anyway, let's move on. British Petroleum, or BP, I think they've been renamed as BP, abandons green energy drive by slashing renewables budget and plowing extra $8 billion into oil and gas.
Or a
One
billion
man,
pounds, which is what, like 10 billion
pounds. Yeah.
US
Yeah.
dollars. Yeah.
One man changes again. The U.S. government is the dog, and it wags the tail or whatever. I mean, one change, and all of a sudden, all these banks. Don't forget, all these banks left. Mark Carney too. Mark Carney was leading this net zero alliance. He was the chair of this board that had all the banks, and they were, they had these practices where it said you couldn't lend to oil and gas producers and that, and they had all these things. You had to have an ESG plan and all that stuff. And basically, all the Canadian banks have left. All the big U.S. banks left first, and the Canadian banks have left. So he doesn't really have a net zero alliance to run. Maybe that's why he's looking for a new job. But in his platform, you'll see in there, he says he can mandate the Canadian banks back into a carbon plan.
Good luck with that.
You can go read
I
that
think
yourself.
there's been a dramatic change, and it's not just since Trump was elected. I think Trump in part was elected because he was willing to acknowledge the change that had already taken place.
It's
And I think
happening
a
all
lot
over
of
the world.
countries,
Yeah.
particularly Western countries,
Yeah.
they just don't any longer see. Well, I think there've been a lot of renewable projects have gone ahead, like wind and solar in particular, and they haven't really been very successful. They were promised the electorates in countries in the West were promised cheaper energy bills and better, more reliable energy. That hasn't happened. Just look at England, which is a disaster, an absolute disaster. It's almost like on the verge of being a humanitarian disaster in that country because they went all in on wind and solar, and it's not reliable. It doesn't work all the time, and they have to import energy produced by coal and gas from Europe and the Middle East and the US. They're in a pretty desperate situation, and their energy bills keep going up. In England, they just recently were handed a new increase, and it's so much money in that country, and the people are sick of it. They're really upset about it, and I think that's happened all over the place. And I think also the other thing is, I think more and more people, I don't know if they've gone and actually read the IPCC reports, which they should do, but I think more and more people have become aware that alarmists like Greta Thunberg, or you could call her an alarmist, or a fantasist like Greta Thunberg, who puts forward false prospectuses about the future and say that the world's going to end and the sky's going to melt and all this stuff. There is no evidence anywhere from any serious person that suggests that the world is going to end, even if we go way over the 1.5%. It's not going to happen. 1.5 degrees, sorry, increase in heat. It just is not going to happen. There's no evidence anywhere to say that's going to happen. And I feel like finally, after all of the misinformation of people like Greta Thunberg, that's come through to the public, and they know that that's nonsense. And I think people are a lot less easy to frighten on this subject now.
So
And
speak.
then the last thing would be technology, I'd say, and people actually seem to think now technology is the answer, and that to get there, it might mean using gas.
Yeah, speaking of Greta Thunberg, Mark Carney, that is one of his idols, is Greta Thunberg. He spoke highly of her.
Yeah, she was in the news yesterday, I think, for some kind of boycott against Israel, some kind of attack on Israel. She's very, very down on Israel. That's what she devotes her life to these days. Wearing a keffiyeh, the like checkered Arab headscarf. She's all in on that kind of thing these days.
We have quite a bit left in our really big show, and we have something really cool at the end. So if you stick around, that'd be awesome. But and the breaking news there was Ukraine agrees to that U.S. mineral deal that Trump was talking about, that $500 billion critical minerals deal, and supposedly President Zelensky's on his way to the White House to sign those papers, and it sounds like the part of that will be a peace deal at some point too in the near future, and it sounds like even with Putin there might be some economic deals with President Trump.
Well, it sort of explains a little bit why Donald Trump was being so vicious towards Ukraine, that he was maybe trying to get this deal through. But I can't imagine that that's going to enhance his reputation in the world, even if he does pull this off, and it's peace deal that's a little bit more favorable to Ukraine than we might have expected last week or something. I don't think he's going to get the Nobel Peace Prize anyway. Put it that way.
And then Out of the blue, Labrador Premier Andrew Furry says he's done. That's he said. I mean, part of the reason is that he says Trump's an erratic, crazy, bonkers president. I don't know if that'd be the real reason that he's stepping down, but
Yeah, well, he sort of said that he's like it's a really stressful job and he like it follows him around all the time. And I think he said he's got like 3 children. I think it was 3. But he's also quite rare for a politician in that he's actually a useful person
yeah,
who
he's a
had a
surgeon.
real
Yeah,
job. He's
yeah.
a surgeon, orthopedic surgeon. So it's almost like at a certain point, if you're somebody as useful and important as a surgeon, there must come a time where you think, like, what am I doing? Like, why am I wasting my talent and ability doing this pointless politics crap when I could actually be saving people's lives? So I think for somebody like that, there's probably always a lot of pressure to go and do the real job rather than waste everybody's time in politics.
Yeah, they could use the doctors. We could use them in merit. There you go. And this was a waste of media's time too. But they played it and they played it and they played it and they played it. And this is just, then we're going to play the clip here for where, like CBC actually spent, we're not going to play that first 2 minutes, spent 2 minutes talking about how they're going to revoke Elon Musk's citizenship. And then we're just going to play this small part here from 206 to 218, which basically says not going to happen.
As CBC's Elizabeth Thompson reports, under Canadian law, someone's citizenship can't be revoked if it can be proven that it can only be revoked, rather, if it can be proven that they committed fraud or misrepresentation to obtain it. So it's not going to apply in this situation.
So again, another populist kind of like mob creating, and then people just love to generate these mobs, these, like politicians. It was driven by an NDP too, who should know better, right? An MDP MP. And then just for popularity, and then also there was one that was started for Mark Carney to revoke his citizenship. These things just don't have any bearing, but the media sure played the heck out of it.
Well, I would interject there and say that my instinct, I must admit I haven't gone and done all of the research, but my instinct is that that's nonsense. Like that person there who said that that citizenship can't be stripped. I'm 95% certain that that's completely wrong and it can be stripped. It would just have to be an act of parliament, because we have to remember, as we say many times, we're in the Westminster system. We're not in a constitutional republic like the Americans. We're in the Westminster system, and under the Westminster system, Parliament is sovereign. That means Parliament is the king, the absolute ruler, basically. So if somebody, Charlie Angus, this NDP guy that loves this petition so much, if he put a bill forward that said just one sentence, we will strip Elon Musk of his Canadian citizenship, and it passed, I'm pretty certain that would be it. I mean, they might have to do a bit more work so that the courts didn't strike it down, but basically Parliament can do it at once. So
we've seen
right
that.
off the bat, I think that's probably wrong. But within the limits now, like the idea that like it could just happen without that bill, that obviously that couldn't happen.
We've seen the proof of what Parliament can do, or lack of Parliament can do. You just do whatever you want.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, the name for that, or the term for that, is the king in Parliament. It's like the idea that this is what all the English civil wars and the Glorious Revolution and all that. If anybody's ever read about that, that's what it ended up being in the end. The monarch became ceremonial, and Parliament became the king. And yeah, I mean, within reason, you can do whatever you want to do. And if the Supreme Court or any other federal court or whatever strikes it down, theoretically, all you have to do is then write another bill that is a bit more clear so that the court can't strike it down, and then it should go ahead.
You put this one there. BBC removed references to Jews and jihad in the Gaza documentary. I'll let you kind of explain this one.
Yeah, they're in...
your old friends, BBC.
They're in... I mean, we should probably say for background, if there's anybody out there that doesn't know this already, the BBC is widely considered and often condemned for being anti-Israel. It's something that's hounded the BBC for decades, at least 25 years, probably a lot more than that, actually. But in the last 25 years, particularly, there have been so many different instances and like investigations and things. But yeah, this documentary has already been pulled It's not even available anymore. They pulled it because one of the prominent interviewees who's featured in this documentary is the son of a Hamas minister. And BBC didn't specify that. They didn't explain that the person that they were interviewing about how horrible life is in Gaza was the son of one of the terrorists that is in control of Gaza. So, I mean, that already it was in the bin for that. But now the Telegraph, I mean, it's so funny that the Telegraph are like, we got our Arabic experts to look at this. I would advise anybody to listen to that. You don't need to speak Arabic to know what she says. She says, Jihad Yehuda. You can hear the words. You don't need to speak Arabic. She says, Jihad against the Jews. And the BBC translated that as resistance against Israeli forces. So it's like, I don't know what they were doing, but the BBC just seem to want to dig their own grave when it comes to this kind of thing. So, you know, all power to them. But just another humiliation for the BBC when it comes to their bias against Israel.
And your friend Emmanuel Macron, President Macron, put out a TikTok video, I think, or an X video, to summarize his visit to the White House. We're going to run this for you.
Incredible one. I think everything is possible with you.
Very famous picture. Here you go. Let the press in, please. Today's a big day in that we had a G7.
President, how do you react?
It's been an honor to be with you. You've been my friend for a long time.
Our common objective clearly is to build peace, and a solid and long-standing peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and the President of the French Republic.
Through centuries, we've been friends, and we are personal friends because we work very well together.
The greatest line I've ever heard.
The US and France always stand on the right side, I would say, of history. And this is exactly what is at stake today.
I think we have a chance of a really good settlement.
Europe is willing to step up, to be a stronger partner, to do more in defense and security for its continent. Thank you, Donald. Thank you. Thank you, Donald.
Again, we're the jilted girlfriend that's looking from outside through the window and saying, what is going on here? What happened? Like all of a sudden, we're not friends, and France is your best friend? Like, come on. You know what I mean? Like, we're on the outside looking in. And
Absolutely.
To me, it's just baffling. Like, I don't know if this is attack on our current government or what it is, but it just seems completely surreal that, like if you look at Macron and Trump, like almost like they're besties, and then here again Canada, who's been there all the time, so many times. Like even in 9/11 we were there. We took the flights in Gander, Newfoundland. It's tough to watch, right? But
Yeah, well, it is very confusing, isn't it? I mean, it does kind of, it does. If you're theorizing out there that Trump is for real, as Trudeau tells us, that he actually does want to absorb Canada, this is the kind of thing you would expect to happen, wouldn't you? That he would continue to treat Canada with contempt, as he kind of bullied it into submission. To eventually with the idea of being that Canada will become part of the United States, but I don't know. Who knows what Trump's got up his sleeve?
Things are changing too. Wall Street Journal, Jeff Bezos's paper, complete shift too in their editorial policy. Their opinion pages. I mean, he basically said the only opinion stuff we're going to write are on two pillars. And it's personal liberties and free markets, and he put that to his editor, and he said, "You either say hell yes, or you can find the door." And the guy took the David Shipley took the door, but he said that's all. We'll leave the opinion stuff, everything else, to other publications, but these are the only two things they want to write editorials on are on personal liberties and free markets. So. And he basically says, I am of America and for America and proud to be so. Our country did not get here being typical. So Jeff Bezos completely shifted, right, from like almost like an anti-Trump stance when Biden was in power to definitely changing. And we've seen that in the LA Times as well, shifting their editorial focus.
Well, he's a very astute businessman and he does what he needs to do to survive, just like Zuckerberg. Whether or not he actually believes the sort of things he's been coming out with, I don't know. I do get the feeling, though, unlike Mark Zuckerberg, who's basically a fraud, I would say, I think in the case of Jeff Bezos, he does actually believe a lot of what he's saying here, because if you cast your mind back, he took a lot of heat, didn't he, for when Amazon started to team up with I think it was the CIA or the DoD. Anyway, with the military complex in the US, he took a lot of heat for that. I mean, I thought that was an astonishing thing to get angry about. Like, one of the biggest companies in your country is helping your country's military. It's like, okay, well, that makes sense. But he took a lot of heat for that, and he came out and he basically just came out and said, shut up, like, I'm going to do this. I believe in America, kind of thing. So I think maybe some of this is actually authentic, but
I do believe
I know
that
if the Democrats win the next election and he changes again, then we'll know that he's a fraud as well. But I don't get that impression. I think he's for real.
I do, and his closing paragraph there, I think, is something that's being echoed around the world right now. And it's not being shared by some European nations and Canada. I'm confident that free markets and personal liberties are right for America. I also believe these viewpoints are underserved in the current market of ideas and news opinion, and I'm excited for us to fill that void. And I would say, like, if you listen to Justin Trudeau many times, he's about controlling information, misinformation, disinformation, and sort of Pascal Saint-Onge say the same thing about the CBC, how we have to have a controlled voice in the market as opposed to like freedom of expression. So J.D. Vance also gave that speech in Europe, talking about how freedom of speech is, you need to be part of that or you can't be America's friend.
Yep, totally. And again, to talk about Europe, look at Germany, where we've seen like they arrest people for sending insults on the internet.
Memes.
And also, memes. And also the Chancellor, who's, just been kicked out of power in the election now. But Scholz there, he came out and sort of like laughed about the idea of free speech being, implemented in Germany, anything like it is in the US. So basically, in other words, came out as anti-free speech. And then in the UK, we saw during those riots in the summer how anti-free speech they are. I mean, a day doesn't go by in Britain where there isn't a new video of somebody being arrested for a tweet or something like that, or a post on Facebook. So it's very, J.D. Vance, think of him what you will, was quite right, I think, to point out that Europe had changed when it comes to free speech, and it had become more hostile to free speech. And the same is true in Canada. And what do all these countries and their political parties, or people in power, have in common? They're all liberals, with a little L. They're all liberals, which is ironic because they're not really liberals in the true sense of that word. They don't want people to be free like a liberal would. But this is something that's happened. They've switched. The right likes free speech now, and the left hates it. That's basically the world that we're in. It's a switcheroo.
Let's all recognize that Canada, in the free Western world, does not allow news on Facebook and Instagram. It's like we've had our audience of 200,000 taken away because of Bill C-18. And this still goes on. They didn't talk about that in the debate either. And we heard from Pascal Saint-Onge saying that they need to give more money to the CBC to fight misinformation and disinformation. And they had that other bill they were going to put forth. They even put more censorship on the internet. So this government definitely does not support the freedom of speech or the freedom of the press.
No, they would probably even say themselves that they're in favor of the regulation of speech. They would probably say something like the sensible regulation, or the safe regulation. That's how they would phrase it. But it boils down to the same thing. They want to regulate it, and they want to pretend like they can that they're the arbiters of what is and isn't true, and what's misinformation and what isn't.
The facts are,
that's a bit of a nuts idea that a government could make that decision.
The facts are, they tried to freeze us out of a press conference here with Justin Trudeau, but we found out how to get there. And the other time, they told us that we were allowed to attend, but not dare ask a question. that we were allowed to be there just to take photographs. And the same thing goes for the parliamentary gallery. They only allow certain media in there, and they'll tell you their reasons why. But I mean, media's job is to hold power accountable, and the government shouldn't be deciding who's a journalist and who's not a journalist. And that's a sad state to just that the government decides who's a journalist and who's not.
Yeah, and civil servants who work in media departments for the federal government also should not be deciding who they do and do not reply to, and that does happen. And I've been asking Pascal Saint-Onge, Canadian Heritage, her department. I've been asking them questions now for a couple of weeks, several times, and haven't had a response because a bureaucrat paid for by taxpayers whose point in life, whose purpose in life is to respond to media requests, they've decided that we aren't good enough to obtain a response. Apparently, that they don't need to respond to us.
I think that's more
the kind of that's the kind of manure that we're fed on a daily basis in the media, really.
They don't believe they should be held accountable, or that question doesn't further their needs, so they don't answer it.
Indeed, and that's outrageous. I mean, it's outrageous for an elected politician to do that, but it's something else entirely for a bureaucrat to do that we all consent to pay for. We all consent to give them their comfortable life and high salary, and they seem to think that they're entitled to not respond to the public if they feel like it.
Let's move on to markets, though, because we're going to get through this last little bit here quicker. Gold kind of like banging around there, so it's starting to like hover just above the $2,900 mark US. That's above 40, it's close to 4,200 Canadian. Bitcoin still down. Like, look at it, it fell there in that $86,000 range there. So it looks like it could be building that last shoulder before it runs up. You don't know. Because there's that gap to fill from the November election there too. If it decides to go down and fill that gap, that from the $70,000 mark to the $100,000 mark, there's that gap. Or it could just start its next leg up here. So that's technical. Canadian dollar starting to reflect the ticking clock on the tariffs, right? So it's starting to move down below 70 cents again. Again, if we get an election and we get a pro-resource government, this thing is going to bounce and bounce hard. I would put a lot on that. But until we see that won't be happening. Mark Zuckerberg, in our AI segment, Mark Zuckerberg and of Meta in discussions with Jensen Huang there about building a huge AI project and over $200 billion. I mean, $200 billion, that seems like light compared to what, like some of these other people are doing right now. Like Tim Cook's Apple committed to $500 billion in the US. Lots of investment dollars flowing to the United States. Tons and tons and tons, especially in the AI space. And then
that Larry Ellison one as well, isn't there? The Saudi one. That's huge.
Yeah, and then Amazon. Jeff Bezos' Amazon, not to get outdone. Alexa, Alexa's got to be one of the dumbest AIs, right? I mean, everybody's used Alexa, right? You're just like, stop it, Alexa, just go to sleep, right? But here's a new, here's a clip from Alexa saying that she's going to get better.
Heads up, Lady Wilson tickets just dropped. No way. 4 tickets, front section, February 28th. Want me to grab them? Do your thing.
Alexa, can you reserve our usual Friday dinner spot?
Certainly. I can book a reservation at Taboon. Just the two of you? What time?
Yes. 7 o'clock? Oh, and text the sitter and add it to our calendar.
I need dinner ideas.
Sarah's a pescatarian and Jake loves Mexican. I think spicy fish tacos could be great.
Sounds good.
Let me know when you're ready to cook the fish, and I'll get a timer started.
That's good, Rommel. There you go. Alexa promising to be a lot smarter. We'll see, Alexa. I did try it out because Grok 3 has voice. We talked about that, I think, yesterday. But now it has a bunch of choices in voice, and I tried it out just to see because it looked interesting. Don't try it out near your wife or anybody around you, but there is a sexy voice there. And yeah, it gets pretty heated. Like
I'll give that one a miss. Huh?
it's like those old 1-900 lines. I used to remember that, where you call the 1-900 line and somebody would talk sexy to you.
I can remember that being a joke, certainly. That we try and get our friends put in an awkward position with that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, you can do it now with Grok. You don't even have to pay the 1-900 line.
Get more people out of a job. The hardworking, sexy talkers.
There you go. You can try it out. If you go to Grok, the app's free. You can download it, and then you can hit the sexy button there, and then you maybe just play it for your wife and say, like, what? Like what? Come on.
It's not even real.
Lucid, in our EV section, Lucid CEO steps aside. Rawlinson steps aside. A lot of it in news out of Lucid lately. I mean, they're the expensive kind of like fancier cars that had long range. A lot of that money coming from the Saudi Arabia Specific Investment Fund. That's where a lot of that funding was for this brand. And then Lucid recently said that they want to be a 20% car company and 80% selling tech to other EV manufacturers or legacy companies. So a lot of changes in Lucid. And Elon has said this many times, concept cars easy, production hard. And they should do stuff on scale, right? And most of them, people have been seeing that. Concept cars easy, like small run stuff easy. Can't make money on it, but production at scale hard. So big changes.
Yeah,
there.
he's in trouble himself right now, isn't he, Elon? Seems Tesla stock's tanking a bit.
Yeah. And some people will say opportunity, and some people will say like what you just said. So there you go. But this is what you're going to be seeing a lot more of. A lot of police departments starting to order the Cybertruck. And we've got a picture of it here. Rommel might have fallen asleep there again. There you go. So that's what a Cybertruck. It looks pretty intimidating for sure. Bulletproof. Comes out of the factory floor bulletproof. Right?
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to get knocked over by one, would you?
No, they're pretty tough. They're now the safest truck in the world as well. So I guess if you're putting your police officers in something, why not put them in the safest truck in the world? And they're also been used in a lot of emergency situations, including the wildfires in Los Angeles, and for communications, because they're also double as an electrical battery. Like you could plug stuff into it, and you can plug in your Starlink communication device, and you can have communication anywhere where the infrastructure has been destroyed by fire, flood, hurricane, or what have you, landslides, mudslides, whatever. So these things can be used as emergency vehicles.
I wonder if we'll see them in Canada soon as well, and Canadian police detachments.
Well, if Chrystia Freeland gets in, they'll be double the price, and I doubt if you'll see any. But again, that's a populist thing to say by Chrystia Freeland. And we're all waiting for the long anticipated wait for the Epstein files and for the JFK and MLK files. And then here's the Babylon Bee with their meme. Epstein list hangs itself moments before release.
Yeah, something along those lines I think is reasonable to expect. But just at the last minute, we can't quite release all this information. Sorry.
So there is a few Republicans out there now, like politicians, senators and congresspeople that are saying, like, you promised the files, let's have them. The American public wants them. More than the American public. I mean, a lot of us are interested in see, because they definitely have these, what conspiracy theories or a whole bunch of things out there. Like, the guessing, and it's just this Epstein list, like who's on the list. There's even accusations that prominent Canadian politicians are on that list, and including, some other people and some prominent people in the U.S. They say politicians would be implicated on that list. So where's the list?
Yeah, well, I mean, what other reason would he have had, Mr. Epstein and Mrs. Maxwell? What other reason would they have had to have had that surveillance system? Very, very sophisticated, complex surveillance system with it had a room dedicated to all of the monitors and the cameras and everything. I mean, I don't think they were just doing that for their own perverted reasons. I think they actually were trying to get leverage. That would be the obvious assumption.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of conspiracies or whatever, or theories. I don't know. You say conspiracy now, it's like to discount it, but a lot of these conspiracies have turned out to be true. Theories out there that it was a CIA op to compromise people so that you can have leverage on them.
Yeah, certainly an intel op. I mean, there's evidence of this having been done in the past, and you mentioned the CIA. The CIA did do this kind of thing in other countries. I mean, obviously, I think they would dispute that they'd ever done it in the US, but they did try it elsewhere. I mean, it's classic, isn't it? The Russians as well, they've done this kind of thing many times over the years.
Well, we've been promised the JFK thing forever, right? That they're going to release it, and nobody ever seems to want to release it. And like, so there's a few of these big kind of myths out there or whatever. Like they're supposedly going to go tour the gold at Fort Knox as well. So let's see it. Let's see it.
Show me the money.
Show me the money. Exactly. Show me the money. Show me the files. And show us what happened to one of the most storied presidents of the United States, famously, who said, ask not what you can do, or ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. And also the president at the time of the Apollo landing. One small step for man.
That was Nixon, actually. It was the president at that time.
Did I mess that up too?
But it was JFK that said, it's JFK that kind of gave the challenge. He's the one that said, we should do it in this decade. And obviously, they just achieved that in 1969, didn't they?
Yeah, he would have been president still. How's that?
Well, he wouldn't have, actually, because he had two. If he'd done that, he would have had 2 terms and he'd have been out. But
no, like not if he did the Trump way.
Yeah, if he'd done the Trump way and did an extra term and made himself dictator for life or whatever it is.
No, the Trump one, when you're in for 4, get knocked out for 4, and then you're back for 4.
Right? Yeah, that's true.
There you
Indeed.
go. I tried to make it work for myself, right? So there you go.
Well, you won. You won that round. Congratulations.
I'll put it on the scorecard here. It's been a longer show today. A good show though. I liked it. So as long as we like it, right?
Well, yeah, doing it for ourselves, really.
Yeah, it's Pink Shirt Day. I'm wearing a pink shirt. Don't bully people. I get bullied lots on LinkedIn. I get bullied. We get bullied on here too. So, but that's okay, right?
It's great when you get bullied because then that entitles you to bully someone in return, and it's really fun to bully people. But I probably shouldn't say that on Pink Shirt Day. So it's not fun to bully people. It's fun to bully bullies, and I do think that's true. So I'm going to leave it at that.
There you go. We do thank you for watching Kelowna Now. We're going to try and do this at 9 a.m., like thereabouts, 9 a.m. every weekday. And so you can find us here on TikTok, on X, and on YouTube. And if somebody has a direct connection to Mark Zuckerberg, just ask him just to free the media, especially during an election. We have an election coming up. Should it only be the voices of the national networks that a lot of people don't even watch? Shouldn't we be able to get our information on the social channels where people are during an election, an important time like that? Free the media. Give us back our Facebook and Instagram.
That would be nice.
It would be appreciated as well. Never mind just nice. It would be appreciated. Very much so. All right. We do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.